and welcome to the Open Book channel. My name is Oli Ander, your designated open book, and this is where I share my journey as an author, talk about the craft of writing, the business of being a content creator, and occasionally review really good books. So recently I had a mild disagreement with another small Canadian creator on Threads, and I wanted to talk about it because I feel as though there's more discussion to be had on the topic I brought up, but poorly executed. If you're interested in my stance on AI and a discussion about mistrust of those who use it, there will be a later video after this one. But in this video, I want to talk a little bit about online etiquette and own up to my faults in my lack thereof. I will be ruminating on what we are responsible for as content creators online and as individuals. And does that really change with our level of influence? And what or who determines that? This began with another creator's post about whether they should revitalize a podcast of theirs to highlight Canadian indie authors. I was intrigued as I am currently looking for means to get myself known, and am aiming to do so through niche local spaces. This sounded like a potential collaboration opportunity, especially since my horror stories are Canadian-centric, and my prose nonfiction is about me, a Canadian. Upon seeing this thread, I used their link to check out their website and determine whether I wanted to reach out. The first thing I noticed was the use of AI images, so I went to Threads and quote shared their post saying, "I hate that I can't just follow an account anymore without having to put the time and effort into being a lazy detective. This sounded great, so I even went so far as to check out the link. Their podcast name is misspelled in part of the bio, which is lightly forgivable, but scroll a bit more to find AI profile pictures and other AI images. Why shouldn't I assume all the writing isn't too? How can I actually trust that you do anything for small Canadian creators with this so blatantly presented?" I did have a third part to the thread which I deleted before taking these screen captures because I'm new to this and didn't think ahead. Keeping receipts is not something genuine or antisocial people think about in foresight. But for transparency, it basically said, "I'm almost bothered enough by this to see whether the podcast is even real or just AI too, but I've spent too much on this already." Sigh face. I deleted the last part of the thread immediately because that was something that I didn't actually have the grounds to speculate on, not having investigated them further at that point. Well, anyone has the grounds to speculate on anything. That's what speculating is, but I didn't want to give the impression to others that their product was an entire facade because I didn't have the grounds to back that up because I hadn't actually checked it. It wasn't an unfounded assumption based on the presentation of other things, but it also wasn't a knowledgeable claim, so I got rid of it. As you can imagine, the creator responded displeased but took it pretty well. I was surprised by their articulate, not angry reply, and although currently I don't agree with everything in their response, out of respect for the fact that I'm not in a position to be making claims on their authenticity, I took down my original quote altogether. They also took down their quote of my quote. If Threads had DMs, I would have reached out to them on there, but as it were, this all concludes on my dangling reply. "Hi, I'm deleting the thread and apologizing for the speculation of your writing's credibility, if you are as open to AI use as you say. It was not tactful to tag an individual as an example. My reaction was careless. An emotional response at having been eager to reach out for collaboration only to be deterred by the AI. I do stand by the sentiment though, and will speak on this topic further without your name's association, of course. There is healthy discussion to be had about mistrust within our community because of this technology's use. Having AI images at this state of its development is morally compromising, especially from a source meant to uplift small creators. I find that disappointing. It's not for clout, it's a disagreement in practice." Which they liked, so I think we're cool. But to the point, this whole series of interactions was caused by my first reactionary quote tweet. Like I said, I stand by the sentiment, though I regret using an individual as an example. I don't know if it's better or worse to admit this, but I didn't know that quoting a thread meant that the original creator would see it. Obviously, it uses their post as context attached to yours, but I didn't assume that those who get quoted would be notified by whom. Yes, our account names are visible, it leads to their profile, but I didn't think he'd be personally notified if someone spoke on it. That's not in the replies of it. I thought there was more disconnect and marginally more anonymity, and I was wrong. So overall, I'm a little social media illiterate, which is not an excuse, but is a large part of why I quoted their tweet in the first place. I probably wouldn't have otherwise if I'd known they'd absolutely see it, so it's less of a case study of a problem I see and more of pointing at an individual. But now, on here, afterwards, I also want to dissect the rest of it. Online mentality, degree of influence, and responsibility. It's pretty well known that the internet can be a toxic place. People feel empowered to say hateful things under the safety net of anonymity, and don't consider those they're interacting with in full as fellow humans. I did not do that. I stand by my responses and only regret that their tagging wasn't tactful, but it came up in the other creator's reply that they aligned my reaction with dragging down another author for status or clout as disappointing. And I find that really interesting. Of course, I'm looking at this from my perspective and with the knowledge that my response was reactionary and an expression of disappointment at having lost working with a potential peer. But it was then their turn to make reasonable assumptions on my intentions. We are living in a world where that's fair to assume. Everything revolves around social currency. People do make drama out of nothing for gains. Just like I was justified in distrusting their content based on the use of AI, they're valid in jumping to the idea that I'd only pointed them out to gain clout. It's wild that we're living in a time where it's less likely that someone says or does something because it is what they believe or how they feel. I deleted my threads to disprove that, in a way, to show that I genuinely wanted to express my emotions on the topic without the inherent dichotomy of putting myself against and above another individual. That's an accountability that I am choosing to take on, though, which I'm not sure should be mine or anyone else's responsibility, really. I'm trying to be a good person, and it felt icky to be aligned with someone who would start stuff for clout. But that doesn't make that assumption correct. I'm holding myself to this standard, but I'm starting to wonder at what point I cannot be expected to. This line of social acceptability usually only comes up in matters of creators with larger followings. Big influencers are expected to act with awareness of their following's power. It's a bad look when a big influencer's following dogpiles another smaller creator based on their personal criticisms, or beef, or whatever it might be. However, at what point does responsibility to weigh their words based on their influence become a gag order? I'm already trying to hold myself to a standard of mindfulness as a content creator, and I have no influence, but I'm conflicted on how useful discourse can be if it's not acceptable to involve anything more pointed than generalizations. Another part of their response was that healthy discussion is great, but tearing others down helps no one. But where do we draw the line at one party's offense and another's right to opinion? Because I don't agree with the practice of using AI images for no good reason, and I distrust those who do. It would be one thing if I said that their writing is awful, but I wasn't actually commenting on the content. I was expressing a disinterest in engaging with it based on the creator's other forms of production. And even if I did hate their writing, podcast, anyone's whatever, where does that opinion belong? Just because they are perceivably peers doesn't mean I'm not allowed to have an opinion. This is getting a bit dramatic sounding because this wasn't really that big a deal, but I'm just trying to throw out larger points of discussion. I personally disagree with the notion that famous authors aren't allowed to share their subjective opinions on books they read because it's their peers' work, but it is still seen as pretty untactful. But again, mine was a criticism outside of the work itself. To use AI images in place of stock photos has no good excuse, and less so in a space and by a creator who claims to promote other small Canadian creators. It's a contradiction, in my opinion. Pointing that out is a criticism. It is negative from my point of criticism, but is not invalid because it is negative. My opinion doesn't change based on our proximity or lack thereof, if one of us was a huge creator and the other wasn't. But it would still be expected to be presented differently, on my end, interacted with differently, because of that, which is weird. We're living in a strange time. Saying that I don't wish to work with creators who prominently use AI is a statement I can make, but saying that I won't work with a specific creator who does so is too far. I don't know how people are ever expected to be held accountable if offenders can't be specified. Was it fair of me to mention they misspelled their own podcast name in their bio? No, that was really just rude, but it was meant to lend to the overall sentiment of distrust in any further use of AI being used in their production on their part. Because in my opinion, arguably, if you were writing it yourself by hand and checking it over, that wouldn't have happened. Should I feel bad about quoting their thread? I don't know anymore. My intent was to speak on a more general topic, of which they are not the sole example of, but does still apply to them. It was a crappy notification to get for them, I'm sure. I spent a whole day in a tizzy of anxiety debating whether I was a complete and royal a-hole, and did end up apologizing for the speculation, but not for the sentiment. However, now I'm sitting here wondering if I'm low-key contributing to a problem of over-censorship. Being reactionary as a content creator is something to avoid, but the fact of my opinion hasn't changed. We're allowed to disagree. I'm allowed to disapprove of a practice they happen to use. I know you're probably thinking right now, Oli, nobody cares. Not about me, not about them. I shouldn't care about the feelings of a stranger on the internet when I am speaking my truthful stance, not just seeking clout. I just don't want to be unnecessarily combative, and the line on that is hard to discern right now. It's not that I don't have a backbone, I'm certain about the message, I'm just iffy on the means of which I am allowed to deliver it. Although I didn't think that they would inherently be notified and absolutely see it, a part of me really did believe that if they ever did see my post, they'd choose not to use AI images, seeing that it was deterring people like me who would have collaborated with them otherwise. I think it would be useful in forming how they want to present themselves online in future, knowing that, which is why I bothered quoting a social media post for basically the first time ever, rather than just write a script about it like I am now, anyway, after the fact. I wanted others online and in my sphere who may be doing the same thing using AI images to know that it is hurting relationships that they could be making with their peers. And if they don't value that, don't care, or want to use AI images anyway at the expense of my deterrence, that's fine, because that's their choice, which is now, I believe, more informed upon interaction. I just don't quite understand why my honest aversion is inherently aligned with disappointing opposition. Well, obviously, because there's a lot of dishonest people out there. The act of virtue signaling is an insane concept when you really think about it, that we've hit a point in society where the intent of one's actions can and should be considered apart from the actuality of them, aka doing good things for the wrong reasons. And that's what it was assumed I was doing when I quoted their tweet. Just kick the AI user because it's acceptable to, and not just because I disagree with and am trying to interact with this specific instance that, in a way, affected me emotionally, justifiably or not. All this to say, reflecting on it, I took down my threads for the speculations I didn't want to propagate. However, if I hadn't been a little rude about it, I don't feel like I should have reacted so amicably. It wasn't my intent to seek clout, but at this point, I don't think it matters. Even if I was virtue signaling, my comment was an expression of an unease of creators like me against the use of AI. And if we're going to be forced into a conversational binary, that's the side that I want to be on. In my next video, I'm going to be looking at the rhetoric of the response to my quote. Not because I'm petty and want to drag this out, this whole situation has got me full of doubt and anxiety, although I'm trying my best to have a constructive discussion about validity, but because on top of the immediate assumption that this was a ploy for clout on my part, I also found it really interesting the use of the word community. I mentioned earlier the presence of influence size and proximity bias, but I'd also like to dig into that spectrum of acceptability. What exactly are we beholden to our peers? The use of language and camaraderie and safe spaces may just be the most dangerous weapon those with ill intent now have in this AI-flooded world, but I'll talk about that in the next video. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to support me or my channel, you can find links to my socials in the description below. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.